Once upon a time, I decided to take my journey as an artist a little more serious and evolved both from a technical as also a creative standpoint. Although to get to where I am now, it took a little more than just a few studies here and there. In a way, I want to take your hand and I guess you could say go on a walk with you, look at each painting I've made, my thought process at that time, what I have learned. Starting in August 2022, I have just stopped drawing traditionally and decided to switch to digital art. Shortly before the switch, I have witnessed more and more paintings from artists made in that medium and simply gravitated towards it. Now, I have to say I was not a complete beginner. I was drawing traditionally for 3 years, although I couldn't say I gained much expertise in that time. My current status was that I had no idea how color works. I have never worked with composition outside of centering given subject. I never had clear values and simply shaded to give the illusion of a three-dimensional space. And finally, my knowledge of anatomy was just as poor as America's healthcare system. So starting with my very first artwork, it was to simply experiment and get used to the medium, which I think was and still is very important. Whether you want to start oil painting, watercolor, etc., try to understand what you're working with first. Just like a chef understands all the parts that play into cooking a fantastic meal, it would benefit you a lot to do so as well as a painter. Now, besides simple experimentation, you have to understand the anxiety I felt at that time. I was so lost because I was so used to knowing what to draw and how to draw it, and all of a sudden I find myself being thrown into a lake with freezing cold water, and the only thing that kept me afloat was the passion I had for art. I wanted to do this professionally, and seeing how far away I was from realizing that goal built up debilitating pressure. Regardless, I was ready to be fully engulfed by it, however much suffering it might bring, for every time I suffered, I grew both as an artist and a human being. Another thing that I always preach is the importance of routine. Because once a routine is established, whatever it is you're doing almost becomes second nature. So with all that taken into account, I decided the best way to start was to learn all the things I was missing. I made very basic paintings and drawings with a realistic approach, using both myself and Pinterest for references. At first I picked out 3 pictures that I liked, preferably with a full body being visible, sketched them out, and every now and then took one of those and turned them into an illustration. I was still very scared of color and wouldn't dare take the first step, so I simply focused on understanding values and light. I never liked plain copying because I found it boring, so right off the bat I tried to give every reference my own twist and story and add a hint of color, calling it my potential style, which was a failed attempt at hiding my lack of skill. So the first thing to take from this is to not be afraid to be real with yourself. I could have incorporated color very early on, instead I avoided it because I knew I was not good at it, and the thought that whatever I will make next will be bad somewhat made me disengage, which on the other hand teaches us another lesson. Focusing solely on outcome is a guaranteed way to fail. Oftentimes not because your work isn't good enough, but because, just like with me, you never started in the first place. Now, as to how much I was drawing, since people always hyper-focus on the time investment rather than the practice itself, which will by the way drive you right into the same wall I crashed in as I was doing traditional art, it was around 3 to 4 hours a day. Point is, to draw every day for the sake of getting better is probably the most horrendous advice you could give to an aspiring artist. As we will continue on this journey, you'll see a magnificent shift happening where I overall draw less daily while actually improving substantially my craft in the overall timeline. Now, around 4 months in, I also decided to make a YouTube channel, which is the main reason why I couldn't draw as much and had to make a clear schedule for these two. Eventually, after a couple of months, ending up making videos on one week and drawing on the other. And besides that, I also made my first colored artwork, and as you can see, it didn't turn out that bad. The overall color palette is very bland and looks smutty here and there, but I expected it to be a lot worse. And so from here on out, it's hell. Literal hell. I acquired all the skills I needed to make my own art, and who would have thought that freedom could be so cruel? I found myself standing on a crossroads, having to decide whether I want to continue this realistic approach, style it down a little bit, or go full-blown anime again. It was that constant back and forth, and I just didn't know what to do. I saw paintings when I was in Amsterdam, on the internet, all without stylization, and I loved them. At the same time, I looked at one art book after the other, and eventually found myself obsessing over one particular individual's work, Sui Ishida. And so I came to the conclusion that I want something in between. People always tell you to enjoy the journey. I didn't. Whenever I look back to those 12 months, I cringe. I don't want to look back. It was terrible. Which I don't say to demotivate you or tell you that it's going to be exactly like that, but just to show you how important perseverance and confidence can be. Now, moving on to the most important lesson of this video, and that is to first figure out what it is you want to do, and then solely focusing on that one thing. I never wanted to work in the gaming industry, for example, so certain segments in this video might not necessarily apply to you. This, on the other hand, ties together with understanding who you are as a person, building more and more confidence in what you do, questioning advice all around you, because whatever it is that you're doing is for you to figure out, and there's not that one specific route everyone should take to reach X outcome. You might hear advice to not focus on style as much because it will just come naturally, plus in a lot of fields, style is more of a skill in versatility rather than one solid pillar one should have. But if you're a painter and you hate every single artwork you make because it doesn't resonate with the kind of art you'd like to make, there's something you gotta do about it. And so style was the big question in those 12 months for me, and I have never felt more lost in my life because in a way, it felt like I had no identity. On a daily, you're being influenced by the world without even noticing it. Something simple as the food you ate in the morning affects how your day continues from that moment on. And the same happens with art. Style is born through influence. To be influenced means to expose yourself to work of others. I have made a separate video on how your media consumption affects your life, but to sum it up, do not interact with the creative world solely out of entertainment purposes. You might stop watching a movie at the 10-minute mark because it didn't hook you and potentially miss out on a life-changing experience. I always like to use Angel's Egg as an example because it had such an impact on my life as an artist, both for making videos and art in and of itself. This was one of the slowest and most pointless movies I have watched in my life, but the atmosphere, the artistry captured me in ways only few titles have. So in those 12 months you will find influences of JoJo, realistic paintings of other artists, Tokyo Ghoul, and much, much more. And slowly but steady, the perfect mix for my personal taste comes to life. I couldn't focus as much on expression because whatever I made felt dull and empty anyways. I detest these artworks despite the importance they played in making what I make today. As to what goes for the technicality, this is something I try to include through challenging myself. This is something I will speak on later as well. But there was one goal and one goal only. Create that one artwork that resonates with me. This meant experimenting with different brushes because, believe it or not, they do matter. Not substantially, but still. If you need a certain texture, it's almost impossible to do it with a round brush, which is, by the way, the brush I use mainly for 80% of my current work. The way I apply color, the way I draw eyes, the way the hair looks, the way I give details, all these aspects had to align with my expectation. So once these 12 months have passed, I have finally made the first work I would consider decent. And the emphasis is on I because another lesson I have learned, what probably would have sped up the process of making something to my liking, is to paint for myself. Some of the artworks I hate might be much more to your liking, and perhaps the work I create now much less. I was influenced by what would sell, what would people like, rather than listening to those feelings inside of me. So once I stopped worrying about any of that and built my own taste, is when I finally could make art in its purest form. You might have noticed that up until now I haven't made any specific studies, because for me personally, I have always found them to be a waste of time. All you have to do is understand what you're drawing. Look at references and look at them as an artist. I don't just put a shadow there because I see it, but I understand that it has to go there because of X reason, and I did that in this time period of those 2.5 years. What I think is more important is to challenge yourself every now and then, because through challenge you put yourself in a situation where you are obligated to learn how to deal with X pose, X lighting, X environment. But to learn what muscle connects to what joint for the sole purpose of knowing that information is very inefficient, because there's no reason for you to know it unless you actively apply it. Our brain is very good at removing unnecessary information. Taking the drawing I call Conflict as an example, my idea was somebody who's staring at a mirrored image of themselves in water. Considering the pose, I always use myself as a reference for 95% of the drawings I make. Through posing I give myself full control of the reference I make, and don't have to spend 2 hours searching on what I now consider a stupid platform for your artistic endeavors. Plus, in a way, it challenges me whenever I have to draw a female body because I have to learn and know what differs from the male body to make a coherent female body. Now back to the drawing. Understanding you're drawing somebody who's on a watery surface and the light reaches that watery surface means some of that light will be reflected on the body, hence you have to adjust the colors and values according to that. So I tried to treat every painting as a lesson, a discovery to get better technically, but that's a side product of what really matters to me now, and that is to be able to channel or capture whatever feeling, story, atmosphere I happen to experience, as well as that of other people. For me, an artist's true skill is based on how well they can filter X event and portray it onto the canvas. Not necessarily as an objectively correct painting, but oftentimes as a fully biased statement. The further I go down the path of an artist, the more thoughtful my approach becomes. The overall speed of production decreases so my mind can constantly keep up the pace. I'd like to use an example where I try to convey a situation other individuals have found themselves in, and just show you how deep art can go for yourself. This artwork is called A Desperate Escape. I was listening to a lot of Mac Miller at that time. My favorite music artist of all time is Juice WRLD. Sadly, both of these people have died of a drug overdose. Both incidents differ from each other in context, but what I have found myself thinking about was how one must feel in a situation where the only relief they can have from their constant pain is an almost guaranteed death. I've never had a connection to this world because I've never even had a sip of alcohol, neither did I smoke or abuse substances. So I listened to the music again and again, trying to understand and making up an image that would describe this world where there's no escape but a temporary one. One cannot keep on living with the struggle life has posed them, and one cannot keep on living with the false escape offered by substance abuse. So outside of just making a painting that works cathartic, I delve into a world that is unknown to me. It is easy to simply portray substance abuse as a weakness or an irresponsibility rather than trying to understand the root of the issue. Imagine you have two options in life. Objectively speaking, there is oftentimes a way to conquer the struggle, but for these certain individuals, these do not exist, except for those that both lead to death or an insufferable life. And so in a way, I almost find myself being grateful to not find myself in a situation like that. Life can be cruel, and next thing you know, optimistic Steven that only had A's in high school is now a homeless junkie. So an artwork hasn't just become an artwork anymore, not simply an expression, but an experience.